Hello and welcome to Crisis Intervention, Chapter 9. Today we will be covering sexual assault and rape. The first part would probably be good. I took it out of the lecture is the myths of rape, and I have that as a little exercise in the unit. But let's start with reporting. The vast majority of rapes are underreported. And I'll show you some more slides as we go through this so that you get a really good sense of this. This is less than 33% of rapes are actually reported. So two-thirds of rapes are not even reported. The age at which you are most likely to become a victim of sexual assault for men is 4 years old, and for women, it's in adolescence, just about 15. In terms of race, about a third American Indian or Alaskan, roughly a quarter are mixed race, 18% black, 17% white, Asian Pacific Islander, about 7%. The thing that is probably most shocking, aside from the actual act itself, is that only 2% of rapists actually serve any time. So let's think about it this way. If out of 100 rapes, 32 are reported, 7 of those 32 lead to an arrest. 3 of those 7 are referred to prosecutors, and 2 lead to a felony conviction. So 2 out of the actual 32, remember 32 being a very small number, so that tells you kind of what happens post the violence in terms of how the system protects and provides justice to women. What is rape? It is a sexual act against one's will. This can include intercourse, oral sex, anal sex, or penetration with any foreign object. It is a felony, carries a 1 to 16 year sentence. Most rapists don't go to prison because of low reporting rates, which we covered. 95% of rapists are men. Very few men actually report their own rape. 1 out of 6 women and 1 out of 33 men have been assaulted or raped. The average rate age at which girls first become victims of prostitution is 12 to 14 years old, and the average for boys is 11 to 13. And 325,000 children are at risk of becoming victims of commercial child sexual exploitation each year. So, since this is all over the place, let's talk a little bit about this idea of rape culture. 2007, a judge made a controversial decision to dismiss rape and sexual assault charges against a man who raped a prostitute at gunpoint. In her decision, she explained that their case was not rape, but rather armed robbery and theft of services. Do you agree with the judge that this is robbery? A female judge making this decision is kind of interesting, yes? This is in part why it leads me to believe that there is an existence of what we call a rape culture, meaning the idea that women can be violated in such a violent way and that it is acceptable. Let me even say it this way. Maybe acceptable is too strong a word, right? Let's use the word denial. There is an extreme amount of denial on the part of victims, perpetrators, and the people who try to intervene or provide justice post the violence. Do you agree that rape is worse than robbery? What makes it worse? Uh, when it comes to a rape culture, we tend to be dismissive of sexual aggression, and this is perpetuated in our society. Let's think about what happens with children. There is a great degree of denial on the part of the victim. There can be denial in the family. Within the system itself, there can be a great degree of denial or minimization of the event itself. I mean, how else does the Catholic Church, Bill Cosby, Penn State, P, Jeffrey Epstein, all these people, they get away with things and institutions get away with things. So let's talk a little bit more about rape culture. Another example in the media is the statement made by Whoopi Goldberg when defending director Roman Polanski charged with sexual assault of a 13-year-old female. She stated that it wasn't rape, rape. I'm not sure what that means to you. Um, what we do know is that Roman Polanski fled the United States in 1978. His victim, Samantha Gailey, told a grand jury that the director had plied her with champagne and drugs, taken nude pictures of her in a hot tub during a fashion shoot. Polanski then had intercourse with her despite her resistance and requests to be taken home. She was 13 at the time. Roman Polanski is a well known director. He originally faced charges including rape and sodomy, but they were dismissed following plea bargaining, and he admitted unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor. More than 100 film industry figures have now signed a petition calling for the release of Polanski. He is the director of Chinatown, Rosemary's Baby, and The Pianist. So we have all these people who are clamoring to be in his corner, and we don't hear so much about those clamoring to be in Samantha's corner. So, is there a rape culture, I ask? Let's think about the steps, or I should say, some of the things that happen post violent incident, post rape. And I forgot this guy's name, Wesley, I think is his name, who developed, or she developed this when we're thinking about stages. Stage one is immediate crisis reaction, which makes sense in chaos, right? Unable to function, perhaps. Um, what you might think of as the typical, quote unquote, typical PTSD reactions. The second stage is reorganization, where they're trying to get back on their feet, trying to figure things out, trying to make sense of things. And the third is reintegration. 81% of women and 35% of men report significant short term or long term impacts, such as PTSD. In terms of interventions, the overwhelming approach is an empowerment model. Uh, and this is staying positive, focused, supportive, um, and allowing victims to have their space and not push them as they've already had enough intrusion. When we're using the ABC model, a quick overview of the ABC model from this empowerment approach. Of course, A is, you're being calm, clear, and trustworthy. Don't be shocked about what they tell you. Reassure and validate for help-seeking behaviors. Validate their feelings. Validate their stories. It is not your job to be judge nor jury. You do not need to pass any sort of judgment. Accept the data for what it is. B is to boil down the problem to the basics, understand the feelings and the cognitions or the thoughts that go along with it. There might be automatic thoughts that are popping up as a result of the trauma, or maybe things that were there already that are now exacerbated as a result of the trauma. Use supportive statements, educational statements, and try to reframe things in a empowerment approach. And lastly, of course, is C, coping, providing resources and supportive services in place to help sustain gains made. Talk a little bit about date and acquaintance rape. It's not unusual for victims to isolate and blame themselves, which makes their symptoms worse. They think it's their fault. They went out on a date and they were taken advantage of and assaulted. And the victims will then blame themselves for this, like they should have known or they shouldn't have done certain things. They doubt their own judgment. There may even be a certain amount of pressure on a date to do certain things physically, even if there's not necessarily love at first sight. When it comes to military sexual assault, the victim almost always knows the perpetrator. It's unique in that there are power differentials and it is very much a male dominated system. Reports have been growing steadily as it becomes more okay to make these reports. About 15% of active force are of active force are female, and oftentimes it's not reported because some of the reporting outlines this is just really insane. They would have to report it to their supervisors. They have to follow a chain of command. Well, what happens if your supervisor is the one who did the assault? Sometimes these are people who end up being diagnosed with a personality disorder or failing to adjust to being raped, as if it's something that you're required to adjust to. Women veterans made up about 10% of VA users by 2010. They, with military sexual assault, they will have more severe PTSD symptoms when reintegrating in non-combat society versus those who were not sexually assaulted. Definition of military sexual trauma: sexual violence that occurs while serving in the military in men and women. They tend not to report due to fears of revenge, scorn, or negative work repercussions. They can be sexually harassed. There can be inappropriate and degrading comments, unwanted physical advances. And the last one I already reviewed with you. And to wrap up the overview of the chapter in terms of interventions: community supports, cognitive therapy, examining automatic thoughts and challenging the distortions in those thoughts, reduce feelings of guilt, shame, and weakness. And here are a couple of quotes. It was unacceptable and not her fault. The perpetrator was motivated to gain control and make her feel humiliated. Talking to others. I also think group counseling, very specific for women or men who've been sexually assaulted, can be incredibly helpful. That sense of universality, people who've been successful, what sort of things they've done to become resilient as a survivor. Talking to others. Eye movement desensitization reprocessing has become a very big treatment approach in the military as well as with post traumatic stress. And there are also a number of advocacy groups out there that can help when it comes to sexual assault. That is the end of this chapter.